Commission.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Casey.
Councillor Cooper said we spend, quote, too much time on issues that have nothing to do with local government. That's the third time I've heard that this morning. Our job is to represent the people of Auckland. And in case you didn't know, 10,000 people turned up outside this building in August to protest the secrecy around the TPPA and to protest free trade agreements generally. For people to say it's got nothing to do with us, how can you know that? Because we don't actually know what's been signed off or initialled. Because the government haven't told us. That's what raises the ire of the people of Auckland. Secrecy. So don't put your head in the sand over this, because it may well have a lot to do with local government, as we've heard from various boards, including Graham this morning and from Barry. We've just made a huge commitment to local economic development. We've restructured the whole department so that we ensure that local decisions are made locally and that we have local economic development at the bottom. This council, whether you voted for it or not, Councillor Penrose, asked the government to ensure, if you look at our own resolutions, to ensure that the TPPA did not reduce our flexibility to support local economic development. I thought that was something you cared about. If you care about it, why aren't you waiting to see what the words say about that?
We are.
I don't know.
Yeah, Councillor.
Order, order.
Well, she keeps on asking questions.
Just I'm a bit concerned about the way the debate has gone this morning. MFAT is neither independent, well, it's not independent, and it's not objective. And one of the things that Councillor Wayne Walker is calling for is an independent, objective appraisal of what the government's put their initials to on our behalf. And I think that that's absolutely what we need to sign up to. Absolutely. So don't tell me to go to the MFAT website to learn about this. I will wait and see what's in the text when it comes, probably at the last minute, as usual, and then we can respond to it. And I want to make sure that that response is not just from the people sitting around here who say it's got nothing to do with local government, but that every member of Auckland Council, every elected member has a chance to input into that. And that's what I asked Mr. Kimpton earlier. It is a political decision. It is of extreme significance both to Auckland Council and to Aucklanders. And I am not sure yet how that decision is going to be made, how that submission is going to be made, how that response is going to be made. So I'll leave you with that. We have 8 responses from local boards, but more in the pipeline.
Thank you.
They are either a part of Auckland Council or they're not. And I believe they are, and I want to make sure everybody has their say on this. Way too important.
Thank you. Councillor Holtz, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is kind of devolved into one of those, you either support TPPA or you don't. And I think, unfortunately, the notice of motion, with all its kind of additions, has sort of forced us into that. I'm interested in G, H and I, which I'm going to support, because I think it actually directs us to do something. That is our job, is to do something. The rest of it, from A through to F, I think is somewhat superfluous and kind of spins this as an anti-TPPA recommendation, and I think that's unfortunate, because we are an island at the bottom of the world, and without trade agreements, we're dead. Councillor Cooper and I have just been at a meeting, and if you'll indulge me for a second, this is Auckland's growth, the reality of Auckland's growth. 819 new residents per week, 344 new houses per week, 1 new street per week. In the 4 years since amalgamation, we've grown by a city the size of Hamilton, and we'll continue to do that every 4 years. 8 new classrooms a week, 405 new jobs a week. Now that ain't keeping up with what's needed for that amount of growth. So I am not opposed to the TPPA. What I am very interested in, as an elected member of Auckland Council, is to understand rhetoric, hyperbole, protest and advocacy aside, what does this mean for local government? What do we need to be aware of? What do we need to talk to the government about? And what do we need to protect as our sovereign rights as the representatives of Auckland? So I will be supporting GH and I. And Mr Chair, we can put them separately because I think A through to F is just kind of comment and it's not objective in moving this debate and discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. The debate, apart from Councillor Hols's comments, has really not addressed the Councillor Walker's resolution. And it has been, Councillor Walker's resolution has been interpreted as anti-TPP. It certainly expresses in the preamble reservations about it, but it doesn't actually say it's against it. But we've been debating what a great thing the TPP is or how it's not a great thing. What we are asking for here, or what Councillor Walker is essentially asking for, is information so that we can examine the implications of the TPP for our community. We have a responsibility to Auckland, and we have to stand up for Auckland, and sometimes Auckland's interests are not aligned with those of the central government. Nothing wrong with that, you've got to expect it. We are not a government department. Our accountability is to the people of Auckland. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the people of Auckland, and this notice of motion addresses that. Given other people have made comments about the TPP, I would say this. One of the members cited the CER with Australia as self-evidently successful, all upside, no downside. There is always a downside. Before CER, we took most of our fruit from our Pacific Island neighbours. After CER, their economies tanked because of that major structural shift. Our consumers got inferior quality fruit, if you ask me, compared to the products that were produced in the Cook Islands and Samoa, particularly citrus and bananas and even mangoes, and the stuff we get from Australia or Peru or the Philippines is not as good. But, you know, you can certainly, CER has worked overall successfully, but there is always a downside, and we need to know what the downside is in this massive structural change in our, not only our trading relationships, but evidently our sovereignty and our laws. We need to know, because it's so far, it's all been in secret, and this is at the behest of major corporations in the US. In terms of poor little New Zealand, from what I heard about the negotiations, our Minister, Mr Grosser, didn't have many feathers to fly with because we've given our tariffs away already, so we didn't have a huge amount of leverage. So I think this is a fair and reasonable notice of motion. It does address a policy that this council has already promulgated in the past. It demands, respectfully, accountability from the government to the Auckland Council and the people of Auckland, and I strongly support it.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair. I hope we don't spend too much time on this, so I'll be very brief. We've already spent, as Councillor Penrose pointed out, 2 hours on an issue which is not a local government issue. And I think we were reminded by the CE not so long ago that to run a meeting of the whole costs $20,000 an hour.
Yep,
and so we're at the clock that we've just ticked over $40,000 on issues that really aren't a matter for local government. In fact, we know it's not. We know there's no interest from anybody else because, look, there's no media here. Nobody from the media is here to report on the Auckland Council's views on the what is it?
TPPA.
Whatever it is.
Trans-Pacific.
Okay.
Look at the
And
camera.
they're not interested because they know that it's not a local government issue. And we've got a big agenda here, and which is local government issues, so we need to get on with those.
Okay.
But let me say this, Mr. Chairman, that people who don't believe in or don't support the TPPA are people who probably don't believe in free markets of any kind, and certainly not free markets when you have to deal with those darn foreigners. And so, but let me remind people that trade and free trade has lifted tens of millions of people around the world out of poverty since World War II. So, I won't repeat this, but we are a small, isolated group of islands down at the bottom of the world, a population of just less than 5 million. And if we had to rely on our own domestic market for our economic prosperity, we would be another failing South Pacific nation.
Thank you.
But now, Mr. Chair, we are part of an 800 million people market. And as an Australian commentator said just recently when asked who was the big winner out of the TPPA, he said New Zealand was the big winner in this. So, Mr. Chair, if you believe in New Zealand's energy, in entrepreneurial spirit, in its innovativeness, in its ability to be able to compete on an international stage, you would certainly support this agreement. And local government, actually, when we find out, everybody's concerned about things being released. Things will be released very soon. We know that, we were told that, and at that point, maybe we might want to make some kind of comment on this. Councillor Walker keeps saying that, you know, we're local government are greatly affected by this, but gave not one example of how greatly affected by this we would be. So I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about that. Councillor Casey talked about economic development, and I just want to remind Councillor Casey that the Auckland Plan calls on this council of a growth rate of 5% per year, which we're nowhere near, I think, at last. And this actually exports at 6%, an increase of 6% per year. And this will greatly help that.
Yep.
So all of our constituents, all of them, from the most humble to the most mighty in the city, will end up being better off as a result of our ability to trade with nations around the world.
Good.
Must be a clairvoyant, Councillor Coates.
Councillor Crum.
Thank
Can
you,
you keep it
Mr.
reasonably
Chairman.
quick, please?
I'm going to attempt to keep my comments brief for the same reason that Councillor Quack said, and I'll again refer, like everyone else, to the amount of time we've spent on this today. It took us 1 hour just to get to the notice of motion. And I would very much argue that ratepayers would question how we're spending our time here today on something that is squarely a parliamentary process. Absolutely. Now, I will agree that there will be local government and Auckland Council implications. Yep. No one's debating that. But it's about when we address those implications, when we know what we need to address. Yep. Before then, it is absolutely jumping the gun and in a very emotive, and the default position seems to be abject cynicism. And I think that that's not at all helpful for where we need the debate to go when we're ready to have the debate. Over the past 10 years, the Parliamentary Select Committee in regards to treaty, free trade agreements, has formally examined 109 international treaties signed by New Zealand. This will be no different. So over the past 10 years, 109 international treaties signed by us have gone through the parliamentary process. This still needs to do that, and we need to be mindful of that and not think that we, at this point, need to jump in with our voice far too early in the piece. We're spending our time we should be spending our time working out how we leverage the TPP for the city, not conspiring that we're pawns in a secret international leveraging game. So that's our next goal. How do we leverage the TPP for Auckland? I really suggest, hopefully with sparse comments, that we move on.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
I move the question be put.
Is there a
Second
second?
that.
No, it's got, is anyone who hasn't spoken?
I'll second that.
I just wanted to make
Councillor Fletcher?
I can make.
Webster? So there's a procedural
Just
motion
point of
on
order,
the floor.
Mr Chair. I'd just like to establish that I have a right of reply.
You have you have a limited right of reply.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a procedural motion. I'll put the procedural motion that the question be put. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
I think it's passed on the vote, on the voices, so we will now ask Councillor Walker if he's got a right of reply.
Thank you very much. What you've got before you, I'd suggest, is something that's pretty simple. It has a great deal of support. I'll go through 4 questions. Do we need to know about what's in the agreement? And I would suggest the answer is yes. Could it affect us? I'd suggest the answer to that is yes. As has been pointed out, there are other similar agreements that bind local government. I'll repeat that. They bind local government. And in the absence of knowing otherwise, I'd suggest that it is highly likely that this agreement binds local government. This particular council is unlike any other local government in New Zealand. It is of significant scale. So the impact on us, on our contracts, on our costs, on things that we enter into, our unitary plan, could be very significant. Is timing important? The answer is yes, because we've got a very limited time in which to react. So do we need this information now,